The best of money matters. Wealth Tracker.
Welcome to the Wealth Tracker, where we dive into the uncharted territories of niche investment strategies that promise to redefine wealth. Hello, I'm Hongbin Jeong. Now, in a world increasingly dominated by data, valuations, and rapid innovation, The Founder Effect by Lawrence Lam offers a compelling reminder that behind every great company is a mind, or more specifically, a pattern of thinking. Lawrence's book reframes how we evaluate founder-led companies, focusing not just on metrics, but on mindset. So drawing from years of experience in investment management, Lawrence explores how founder psychology can be a predictive force in business performance. So what makes some founder-led companies thrive where others stumble? And how do executives and board directors make smarter, more profitable decisions over the long term? And how can outsiders analyze executive and company performance for smarter investing? Well, to find out more, joining me now is Lawrence Lam, who is the author of The Founder Effect and founder and managing director of Lumenary Investment Management. Lawrence, welcome to the show.
Looking forward to our chat.
Thank you so much for joining me. All right, Lawrence, your book, The Founder Effect, explores the traits that set successful founder-led companies apart and how investors can capitalize or can use this to their advantage, right? How important is a founder's personal narrative or why in shaping the company's culture? And can that be a predictive signal for long-term success? And why is this important for investors to know?
Absolutely. It's extremely important. The why is the heart of a company's DNA. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the company is an embodiment of the founder's philosophy, how they want to operate, and ultimately their ambition and motivation to succeed is reflected in how the company goes about day to day. And this separates the average run-of-the-mill company that's just going through the motions quarter by quarter, year to year, versus those that are actually building for something big. And we see in today's world, the biggest companies in the world, most of them are actually founder-led. Mm-hmm. If you think about the names, you look through them now.
Right.
So the relevance to investors is that people and their decisions drive wealth. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that companies are a result of management's decision-making over many years. So if companies are made up of good decisions, made up of good people, then investors, all the people that are involved with the business stand to benefit and ultimately generate wealth.
Okay. Well, I took some time to read your book as well. I mean, you describe judgment as one of the core pillars designed to help your readers assess the true potential of companies beyond surface level metrics, where you describe judgment as it equals decision accuracy plus strategic allocation over group cognitive biases. Okay. So what psychological traits or mental models do successful founders consistently exhibit when making high stakes decisions?
There are many angles to decision making. The first thing I observe is usually with very successful management teams and founders, they're very careful with the process for their decision making. So in other words, how they make decisions is extremely important. By way of example, they usually keep a very small number of key decision makers. Mm-hmm. They don't have big boards, big management teams, and a good example of that is Berkshire Hathaway, a handful of people. So when they're faced with problems, they're trying to solve these issues with a level of resourcefulness, and I call it vertical problem solving. Mm-hmm. We see that so many times with founder-led companies that are thinking about, okay, when I need to make a high-stakes decision, can I get through this by solving it internally? Can I invent my way out of the problem? AWS from Amazon is a classic example of that. They had to solve an internal problem first before they actually sold it externally, and it ends up becoming a key part of their business. So the next part of it then is, what's the horizon for this high-stakes decision-making? And usually what I see is that with companies that are founder-led, they have a very extremely long-term generational view. Samsung, Lee Byung-chul is an example. He started Samsung Electronics in 1969 when they were just, in fact, mainly a food business. So, and often the last thing I observe is that they often make very small incremental bets. They're not focused on making large acquisitions, big plays. They're not in it for the ego. They're just making small incremental bets that compound over time.
Right. Well, then how do founders, cognitive biases like overconfidence or loss aversion manifest differently from hired CEOs? And how can that be a strength rather than a weakness?
Well, they certainly, have conviction. They certainly have the ability to make decisions and solve problems in a unique way because they own the business or they have influence over how decisions are made. And that's a good thing. It removes bureaucracy. There's a level of speed with their decision making. However, I would say that it needs to be balanced carefully because we do see a lot of founders come unstuck by the ego gets a bit too big. And so we've seen recently with some very prominent founders around the world that they kind of have backfired on themselves. But certainly that bold decision making is required to come up with companies like Blue Origin, like Tesla, like Starlink. These companies don't come about because a salaried guy sitting there, getting paid their usual salary.
Right. Well, in your book, you've also highlighted that in your experience as an investor, you often saw executives place, greater emphasis on short to medium term performance metrics at the expense of long-term business sustainability, and that this can complicate the pursuit of true alignment. How can investors then differentiate between, genuine alignment and superficial alignment in founder-led companies? How do you define true alignment here?
Well, I came from an investment banking background, so I know all too well that, bonus structures are all about the short term, and that's why investment banks are typically cyclical businesses. They don't really compound over time. To summarize true alignment, it's really eating what you cook.
Okay.
So do you feel the pain in the tough times? Do you reap the rewards of your decisions, 10 plus years from now? And if the answer is yes, then you know you have true alignment. Why does it matter for investors? It's because alignment between management, shareholders and the board makes everyone row in the same direction, and that's how you achieve extreme wealth building over many years. I write in the book about alignment, motivation. There's more than just extrinsic motivation, which is what most people think about. In behavioural psychology terms, intrinsic motivation matters just as much. So things that aren't all about rewards and money.
Okay.
So I would look for those things and be careful of some founders that are more flippers rather than builders. They're just there to pump up a company, sell stock and get out.
Right.
You want the founders that are there for the long term, looking to build something very big.
Speaking of flippers here, then, what signals or red flags should investors look for that suggest a founder is misaligned with their company's growth stage or mission?
Yeah, I wrote an article for the Australian Financial Review about this recently. Actually, the red flags are quite intuitive. So typically you look for large sell down in stock. A good example of that is Alex Carr Palantir. Palantir's share price has been going through the roof, but he sold down, I think it was around 20% of his personal holding recently. So watch that space. Founders that change roles, so going from a CEO chair to some other technical role, I've seen before, and I've certainly experienced the change in the company when that happens. And then there are sort of ego and bad behaviour type things that you start observing where it is no longer in the interest of the company and it's just about the founder and how overconfident they've gotten. And another red flag is look for, very large transactions or very large acquisitions, which is a signal that, there's too much risk being taken.
Okay. Well, bringing up another quote from your book, psychological ownership is the deep inherent sense of personal investment in a business, even in the absence of legal ownership, that inspires founder-like behaviors, adding that this is the hidden superpower in achieving optimal alignment. So in your view, how can investors, access the level of psychological ownership a founder has, and how does this influence the company's long-term success?
I discuss this in detail in the book, but the red flags that I mentioned, it's quite easy just to invert those red flags. If you invert them, then it tells you the opposite of what you should be looking for. But also I'd say that it's not just about one person. For a founder-led company to be successful, any company to be successful, they need to really build psychological ownership at a company level, at a broad level. So there are some objective things that investors and outsiders can look for. You look for the way the organisation has been designed, who are the key decision makers, and I delve into those objective measurements in the book and really explore in detail a seemingly subjective topic in a scientific way.
So how can investors differentiate, between charismatic leadership and true psychological alignment with company goals?
Much of the red flags I mentioned, I'll also add that there's a test of time. So the trend in behaviour matters. A lot of founders if they're a flipper, then they're just looking to pump up me for a couple of years after IPO usually. But if you look at people like Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, he's been there for 30 years and he's only just come into prominence now into common media, but he's been there for a long time and he has a track record of behaviour and setting that standard that has led to his success. I would be wary of sort of new founders that are post-IPO. It takes time to measure their intentions and the level of motivation. And I would also look for signs of intrinsic motivation. So where it's not necessarily about fame and fortune, but are there things that indicate that, hey, it's more than just the extrinsic motivation, it's intrinsic motivation for them. And I tell a story in the book about a company I visited in Japan and what I saw in the reception area told me a lot about the company.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we'll just have to read more to find out about that story. But speaking of which, you also mentioned in the book that what drives true value creation is the influence of the executive management team as a unit, its ability to compel employees to go the extra mile. So you discuss influence as a driving force behind company growth. How can investors then measure or detect intangible influence in founder-led companies, especially pre-IPO or early-stage ventures?
Yeah, influence takes time, I mentioned before, and so you need to set the foundations for influence first. A lot of times, early-stage companies, they get sucked into a fundraising game and they almost see it as a badge of honour to keep raising money. And then they become fixated on trying to influence key investors. But rather they should be spending their time influencing the broader customers that they're trying to target. So I mentioned in the book, influence can be looked at in terms of internal influence and external influence. Internal being within the organisation. How are they designing the team to be able to scale? Do they have full command over their employees to do what they want in terms of a philosophical way of doing business? And then externally, if you look at companies like Pop Mart, Wang Ning and Lululemon, their level of influence has come from their ability to target a very specific customer base. Lululemon being yoga-inspired people, and Pop Mart being those that are, they like their...
Labubu's.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I discuss this in great detail on how you could start recognising companies that are on the right track to being able to influence both internally and externally.
Okay. Well, overall, Lawrence, in what ways can, understanding founder psychology or starting the so-called founder effect help investors spot undervalued opportunities in the market? I mean, can knowing this help investors spot companies likely to skyrocket in value and market share?
Yes, because what you're focusing on is the people behind the company, which tells you the path for the future, because their decisions influence the future. But a lot of people gravitate towards numbers, which is inherently historical, backwards looking. You want to be able to focus on the potential of the people and the decision making, which gives you an insight into what can happen into the future. And so this book is about assessing people. It's about how you read a team and predicting their likelihood for success. Can they deliver wealth for investors over the long term?
I mean, there are great insights in your book, and we could go on and talk about what was discussed in your book, but I'll leave it up to our listeners to read more, The Founder Effect. But before we let you go here, Lawrence, what else would you like your readers to take away from your book?
That it's not just about founder-led companies. The traits that I mention in the book come from a lot of founder-led companies, but certainly if you look at a company like Marriott, Arne Sorensen was a non-family member CEO that ran the company exceptionally well, but also exhibited these traits. So these are universal traits that investors can observe in all management teams.
Well, thank you so much, Lawrence, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, if you want to read more, do check the book out. It's called The Founder Effect. That was Lawrence Lam, author of The Founder Effect and founder and managing director of Lumenary Investment Management. This has been The Wealth Tracker with me, Hongbin Jeong.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.